President Trump has escalated the trade war with China yet again. Just in this afternoon, the United States officials, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that the U.S. had now imposed a 125% tariff on China. And this in just the last few days has escalated from Trump's original comment, which he said he's going to put a 34% tariff on China. And then China matched that. And the United States said, you better not do any more. And then China says, okay, we'll do some more. And then the U.S. went to 104%. And then China went to 84%. And then now today, we've gone up to 125%. So you see, this is just continuing to escalate up higher and higher. And where this is going to go is unknown. Now, this escalation comes in the midst, though, of ironically, we had Professor John Mearsheimer on a show earlier today where we were talking about this tariff fest, which the U.S. had embarked on, which at the time had 185 countries on the tariff list. And before we got off the air, that had already changed. And apparently the administration says, actually now we're going to put a 90-day pause on all the rest of those tariffs on everybody except China. We're going to continue that because they were disrespectful, I think is one of the phrases that was used. And how dare they retaliate? You had Scott Bessent, we're going to show you what he said here in a minute, where he said, look, I told people don't retaliate. And listen, we got to look at this is in the real world. This is not like some parent talking to a child where they can just tell you what to do and you have no choice but to do it. If you put a tariff on people, there's going to be some response. And the response was literally all over the map. So, some of them were literally just fawning and basically begging the United States not to do the tariffs. Vietnam was one of those. And then others were silent on it. You had people in the European Union saying, all right, what are we going to do? We're going to come back with something. We're not going to take this land down either. Their retaliation was less. It was, I think, 25% in some categories, 10% in others. On top of that, that was not addressed, at least not in the comments that I saw today by the United States. They just singled out the Chinese. Now, earlier this morning, before this went into the last iteration, you had President Trump explaining why he was making some of these moves and what he expected to happen next.
Only with China, but China was by far the biggest abuser in history, and others also. But somebody had to do it. They had to stop because it was not sustainable. Last year, China made $1 trillion off trade with the United States. That's not right. And now I've reversed it. It's for a short period of time, but we made $2 billion. We're making now $2 billion a day. And somebody had to do it. Roger actually said it. Charles Schwab was here a little while ago, one of the great financial people, and he said he's been waiting for 40 years for somebody to do what I did over the last month. And if you didn't do it, you wouldn't have a country. It wouldn't be sustainable. So I'm honored to have done it. And, look, nothing's over yet, but we have a tremendous amount of spirit from other countries, including China. China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it. It's one of those things they don't know how quite. They're proud people. And President Xi's a proud man. I know him very well. And they don't know quite how to go about it, but they'll figure it out. They're in the process of figuring it out, but they want to make a deal.
President Trump has fired the head of the powerful National Security Agency and far-right activists.
We'll see just, how eager they are to get a deal. I'm sure that they're eager and willing to, interested in getting this tariffs off the table, and they don't want to have to deal with this stuff. I have no doubts about that. But the implication being that, as soon as they can figure out how to come around to what I want, then we'll be able to get this back to some sort of normalcy, some kind of a negotiated settlement. That remains to be seen, because while they are proud people, they are also, like Trump, not wanting to be bullied. And listen, you got to understand, China has a chip on its shoulder for a long time, and they're coming out of what they call the century of humiliation or something to that effect, where they have been upset about how things had been over the previous 100 years, and that they're now coming up out of that. And the last thing that they're going to want to do is to, at least without some kind of cost, to basically submit to what the United States wants, the leader of the West, and say, that we're going to curtail our economic situation and our circumstances to meet what's acceptable to the United States. maybe that's what'll end up happening. I certainly can't predict what the Chinese are going to do because they oftentimes think long term. They usually think long term, and sometimes they'll take a near-term setback for something else. But I also know that there's a limit to Chinese patience. And listen, so far they've gone to 34% to match what the U.S. did the first time. And then they went to 84%, which didn't quite match the U.S. 105%. But now it remains to be seen, because this is literally hours old, that the U.S. went up to 125. So I doubt seriously that China's going to say we're going to do nothing in response to that. But listen, there's also some issues with the Chinese that make this more complicated than it may seem. Because you can keep ratcheting up these numbers and you can go up to all kinds of stuff, but at some point they lose their relevance because, and from one expert I listened to earlier today, that the margins on Chinese exports are such that if tariffs get up much over the 34%, then it becomes kind of neutral after that. And once it gets to 50%, then it doesn't matter. It can go 50% or 5,000%. They're not going to do business then, because they can't even they can't come even, much less make any money. So beyond apparently the 50% threshold by one expert, the numbers don't even matter. Now that it's just a matter of what are we going to do to save face? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond to this? So the U.S. is up to 125, which, according to that expert, is already way over the top to where they could make money anyway. 84 or 104% was already over it. And so now China can put some other tariffs on top. But listen, all of this is going to come at a cost to the United States. Trump may be looking tough, and Charles Schwab, as he said there in that last brief I showed you, he may be saying, sure, boy, I've been waiting for somebody to do this for 40 years. Well, we'll see how eager you are to do that, because the question is going to be who's going to blink first? Who's the pain going to fall into that's going to be the worst? Can the Chinese economy take a hit and last for a long time? Can the U.S. economy take a hit and have these tariffs last for a long time? Because listen, I mean, starting tomorrow, a lot of the prices on everything that we have in the United States, things that you order on Amazon, on Temu, on all kinds of places, a lot of people do business back and forth between China and the United States, and everything is going to be going way up in prices. Some companies are not going to be able to sustain that. And so you're going to see overnight a lot of your prices on things like cell phones, iPhones, etc., lots of electronics, things are going to be going up. And so which economy can take that the longest? Because both economies are not exactly that strong. China has some definite weaknesses in built into its system. We have some weaknesses. There's already, many of the experts are already saying, even before this started, that there's about a 60% chance that we're heading into a recession, or may already even be in the first levels of it. So can we take this hit here? Because, yeah, Trump has paused the tariffs on everybody else, but this is the number one and number two economies in the world. And our bilateral trade is huge. So if you have both sides tariffing the other, and now that they can't get anything without paying this huge price, guess who pays that, folks? We do. The consumers always pay this. This is basically a tax that comes out of our pocket, because it's not coming out of Donald Trump's pocket. It's not coming out of Xi Jinping's pocket. It's coming out of the businesses that do business back and forth, and out of the consumers that buy those goods. And this is going to have, the longer this goes, it's going to cause problems for most. I think I've seen a lot of Chinese commentators accurately say there's not going to be a winner in this war. Now, maybe personally, it can be either Trump or Xi Jinping, depending on who blinks first, can claim some kind of victory. But the economies of both sides are going to suffer from this. And that's one thing everybody needs to understand. Don't be too quick to say, yeah, go get them, Trump. You show them Chinese, because it's going to start coming out of your pocketbook. And this thing could go for a long time. Trump only lasted these tariffs on a lot of these countries. Some of them didn't even go into effect yet. And now that from 185, it's down to 1. But it's funny because Scott Bissett says that, we said if you retaliate, there's going to be a price. Well, we showed you, I think, earlier in our show today, that the European Union already said that they're going to put a 25% tariff on steel and some other products, and a 10% on some other things. So they've already announced theirs. Now, whether there's been some conversations and those are now off the table, and so are ours, that hasn't been reported yet. But they had gone that path too. But then this also gets into, how can you trust the United States? I mean, we said we were going to do these tariffs. And you remember when Trump first came in, there's going to be these 25% tariffs on Mexico and on Canada. And then they went away. And then they kind of came back again. And then they kind of went away again. And then we talk these 185 tariffs over here. And then now Scott Bisson is saying that there are 75 countries that are now willing to talk to us. And in fact, instead of telling you what he said, let me let him say it for himself. Here's what Scott Bisson said a couple hours ago.
The successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today, it has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
If you can pause it right there, Gary. So listen, that leaves some outstanding questions. So we said, if you don't retaliate, you're going to be okay. And we know for sure that China and the European Union did retaliate. But then he said there's 75 other countries had come to us and said they're willing to negotiate. I mean, first of all, did we even attempt to have a negotiation with these folks before? Did we even make any diplomatic and economic effort whatsoever to say, hey, we're thinking about putting these tariffs on, these reciprocal tariffs, unless we can come to some kind of negotiated settlement? And then can we work something out? Did we even attempt that? But it doesn't appear that we did. And in fact, now that you're talking about 75 countries, which, by the way, they did not define. We don't know who those 75 countries are, but that means that there was 110 that did not come in and say anything. So what about those countries? They didn't come, pleading and begging to negotiate something better. And what are these countries going to do? Even though you've said here 75 countries are going to negotiate, negotiations are talks. That's where you're going to enter the precedent. Nothing has been done yet. Nothing has been agreed to. You still have to get every single one of those countries to have to agree to something. Let me just ask this obvious question. Does the administration have 75 teams of people that are qualified that can go and have a bilateral negotiation with each of these people? And what if the other 110 come alongside? Where is the manpower, the qualified manpower, just the sheer numbers of human beings that know how to conduct negotiations? I doubt very seriously whether they've got 10 or 15. I don't know how they're going to conduct 75 simultaneously. I mean, is Scott Bisson going to do this? I mean, obviously you can't do that. That is an avalanche of capabilities and things that have to be done and decisions that have to be made and intricate back and forth offers, counter offers, et cetera, considerations. This is an enormous situation we've taken on. And I don't know practically how that's going to be done, but people need to be asking these questions of Scott Bisson. That's not a minor issue I just raised here. I didn't hear any reporters ask that question of how this is even going to be done. I mean, he said 90 days, but 90 days for 75 countries? I mean, that's kind of crazy, to have to try and do simultaneously, especially when you've been cutting State Department staff and really the staffs of every agency in the United States government. I mean, this would be a great time to have USAID on board at full strength because they have action officers and foreign area officers, et cetera, many of which have now been fired and they're no longer available. So I'm not sure where you're going to get the people to do this. And then you have the issue on any individual country. What if they don't want to agree to your deal? What if they want to try to something that's not as good as what you're hoping for? I mean, you see that in any kind of a situation, you're not going to get great negotiations. People want the tariff to be taken off. So they'll come and say, we're willing to talk. But getting them to actually pony up is something that matters, because understand this, that in every case that we're talking about there, a status quo existed prior to putting these tariffs on. President Trump said 185 countries were being unfair to us and were ripping us off, et cetera. So that means that whatever the status quo in every one of those cases were, Trump is claiming that it wasn't good for us. But that means that all the target countries in each side also were content with how things were working at that time. We're now going to require every one of those countries to renegotiate to something to their disadvantage. And for any country to do something to their disadvantage, there's got to be a quid pro quo. You've got to give something to get something. What you can't do is just tell everybody in the world, hey, y'all are all going to come together to me and you're all going to pay tribute. You're all going to agree to what I tell you, or there's going to be punishment, and think that that's going to work. It's not going to. And again, I don't even know how we're going to get to that point, but there's going to be some disappointed people if you think that all these nations are going to just eagerly come in and just hand over whatever's asked for. They're going to want something in return. That's what negotiations mean. That's what I'm saying when I say that there has to be 75 teams of people who are qualified who have to know what they can and what they can't give away, because none of those folks are going to come into with just say a checkbook and say, what do you want? They're going to also come with a list of demands for what they want. So this is really a lot more messy than what it sounds like. And you saw Scott Bissett there talking about how this is a big victory and a great success and leadership and all that kind of stuff. But this has opened up a whole can of worms that I haven't heard anybody in the mainstream media even talking about yet. They're just looking at the gross number and the pause, et cetera, and they think somehow this is fine. So, and that's 75 plus then the 110 that we don't know about yet. And allegedly they were at disadvantage. So how's that going to go when they haven't even come to us and said they're willing to talk yet? So there's that to discuss as well. Then, of course, after he talked about that, Scott Bissett then went on to address the Chinese issue in a little bit more detail.
Ed, go ahead. Secretary, thank you for doing this. Let me ask you three quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China.
Mexico and Canada. Are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors. And what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced the tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So, yeah, you're right that a lot of those goods have started to flow into Europe. And that was a big problem even for Europe, because they were concerned that they might get hit with a lot of these cheap goods flooding into their markets, which could cause some problems for their businesses as well. And that is caused because we put these tariffs on, because the Chinese have these deals and they have all these production rates and that kind of thing that was based on the trade that had been going on. And now all of a sudden that's turned upside down. Now you call bad actors. That just means, in his definition, anyone who doesn't do what we like. And listen, we got to understand. We need to understand this. When we look at this trade imbalance, you just look at it on paper and you say, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, China's bad. We should fix that. Well, a lot of that is a lot of that is because American businesses have helped to facilitate it, because we don't want to do manufacturing in our country because it costs us more. So we're more than happy to have a lot of that manufacturing going on in China. Now, that's on paper or ostensibly one of the things President Trump wants to redress. That's fine. The concept is fine. I'm all for bringing more mechanization and industrialization and all kinds of production in the United States. That's a good thing. It is a national security issue, I think. And so I think there's validity with what he's trying to accomplish. But the way that we're going about trying to accomplish probably will undermine that and probably will make it worse, because you're also going to have to get American businesses to be willing to stop making more profit that they had been doing by having a lot of the stuff offshore onto Chinese production, by doing it at the much more expensive version in the U.S., which means their profits are going to be down. Ergo, they're not going to want to do it. So this is a very, very complicated issue, and there's no easy answers. And I think that there is room to be looking at ways, creative ways to correct this imbalance. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take a lot of willingness to give and take. And if we're not willing to give anything, and we only want to take, then we're going to have the situation we have right now. And you see, China is already, they went from whatever the tariff rate was up to 34% to match the first, and then they went 84% to come close to matching the 105. And who knows what they're going to do after this one. I think it's very unlikely that they're going to just say, all right, we're going to fold our tent, fold our hands, and then come and grovel before President Trump. I mean, that's what he wants, and I think that's the impression that he thinks that they're going to do. But based on some comments coming out of China here, if you could put that headline up that we had, this is what one of the senior officials in China has said. He said, if the U.S. insists on further escalating its economic and trade restrictions, China, has the firm will and abundant means to take necessary countermeasures and fight till the end. That was China's Ministry of Commerce before the 84% hike, before the 104% from the U.S. So now that it's up to 125, as you can see there. And the expectation is that China's going to do something further to go down that path. And Trump was right when he said that both Xi Jinping and himself are very proud men, and they don't like to lose. And China is rising up, of course. And now then they have a lot of economic power that they didn't have before. And their economy does have some weaknesses in it. There's no question about that. But we're now in a situation to where the world is going to be watching to see who blinks. Now, Trump, from a certain perspective, already blinked on all these other ones because he had 185 countries. Now it's down to one. So instead of having these issues with the European Union, who obviously, we showed on our earlier show today how they had imposed 25% tariffs on steel, which is a big issue here. And we're selling here. That's one of the places we do have production. And they said they're ready for further countermeasures. Presumably, that wasn't part of the discussion today, but I'm guessing based on the fact they paused the rest of that stuff, that's also going to be paused. But then you get into the issue of trust again, because, even our allies have got to be saying, what in the world is going on with the United States? How can you make any long-term plans and investments if you're not sure if the whims are going to change and there's going to be new tariffs put on at any one time, or that the conditions are going to be changed, or that he says he's going down one path? And look, it was just yesterday that Trump said he was asked if there would be any extensions or delays in these tariffs. He said, no, there's not going to be any. There's not going to be any negotiations. We're not going to do this. This is the tariff. And then less than 24 hours later, there is a pause. There is a change. So again, this builds uncertainty around the world, both of our adversaries and of our allies. Where does the United States come down on this? This is more of a problem and a continuing problem that doesn't get enough understanding, because from the U.S. side, we look at it, we're just like, yeah, that's what we said. So, okay, so we changed our mind, whatever. It's going to end up working out. And that's fine for you, because by and large, we're on the top side of this dynamic. But that isn't going to last forever. And these kinds of things keep chipping away at that advantage, because it lowers the issue of trust. Now, that is also a bigger issue when Scott Bissett there, just in the last part of that clip, said that, listen, these are bad actors and they're causing problems for the whole world. Well, they're not causing problems for the whole world. These kinds of things also, in addition to the trust issue, is part of what is bringing Russia and China closer and closer together. And allows them to have, they've had this, no holds barred friendship that they signed at the beginning of, just before actually the Russia-Ukraine war. They've continued to have summits and meetings between the leaders, and they say that there's no daylight, no space between them. They're continuing to help out there. Even though China didn't help directly in war, they certainly gave them a lot of moral support to the Russian side. They've been doing lots of trade and energy back and forth, and some other dual-use facilities, many of which probably did find their way into the Russian military system, things that they needed. These things just make them work closer and closer together. And you talk about, the whole world is pushing apart. No, it's not. In fact, this is making BRICS, the economic system, even more attractive, because Russia and China and in India and Brazil and now a lot of these new countries that are coming into, Turkey's coming into it, others are looking to come into it, because we don't want a situation to where even Western European countries or others in South America start to go, the Chinese and the Russians are a little bit more stable, have a little bit more stability. What they say, they generally do. And we may not like all the terms, but they're terms that we can live with. And because they do have give and take, they do listen. The Chinese do listen to other partners. The Russians do listen to other partners. And they have dialogue back and forth. And those don't, completely lord it over those that are on the inferior side. They definitely put pressure on them. There's no question about that. But in comparison, it's not anywhere near what we're trying to do to compel compliance on everything that we want. And I know it's an American thing to want to be strong. We love to be on top. We love to be telling everybody what to do, that we're the policemen of the world and all that kind of stuff. And it plays well. And we have the strongest economy in the world. We have the strongest military, globally speaking, in the world, or at least it has been. Now, that's changing, by the way, and I've mentioned that several times, but I don't want to divert into that. But the bottom line is extremely powerful, and obviously with our nuclear weapons and our economy, it's great, as long as we keep that economy straight and strong. If our economy starts to dip, and if our partners and economic partners, adversaries, allies, etc., start to feel like they can't trust the United States and that they don't want to trust their economies to something that's unstable, that they may drift over towards the BRICS because they may say that's where some stability lies, then our economy could suddenly have a real problem. And that we could suddenly not have the leverage that we have right now that allows the president to do what he's doing here. Those are some real risks that we have to have. So the bottom line is, don't get caught up in all these headlines that just happened that, Trump's showing China what to do. Now we got 125% tariff and everybody else has been brought into line, because everybody else ain't been brought into line. This has just been dropped for the moment because of unilateral action by the U.S. But even these 75 people who claims to have come with hat in hand to the United States, there's a lot of work that has to be done before that actually translates into anything positive for the United States. So far, it's all about a willingness to discuss. That's it. Nothing has changed. Whatever he didn't like about the trade imbalances hasn't been resolved. All of that hard work still remains to be seen. So the devil's in the details, as they say, and we need to keep a track on that. Because right now, I think that we may have bit off more than we can chew with how this is working out, but we'll continue to track it here. Anyway, I just wanted to give you this brief update so you understood kind of where we are on things and what to look for coming in next. And boy, this whole issue with, I guess the next thing we're looking for is China to see what they're going to do in response to this 125. But just understand, this one could last for a while, and it could hit you in your pocketbook hard at a time when your pocketbook probably doesn't need to be dinged anymore. We'll continue to follow this for you. Appreciate you coming on Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and we'll see you tomorrow on the next episode.